Good morning, everybody, and a very big welcome to you all to All In Live. And this morning's All In chat is with somebody that I'm really excited to chat about. His name is Eddie Hobbs, and I've no doubt that you have heard plenty about him and seen him many, many times. So to have him on the show is fantastic, and I've got some good questions. We're going to have a great chat, and Eddie, you're very welcome. Thanks for giving me the time.
Thank you very much, Kira.
So I'm going to jump right into it. Would you let people know what it is that you do as a whole?
Well, at the moment I'm running, have been running for across 3 decades now, an advisory firm, financial advisory firm, which is my own, and through thick and thin since around the mid-90s, and that's fine. It's based in Kildare. We've clients from all over the country. I've been emphasizing gold a lot over the last 23 years as an advisor, which is now coming to pass. As you can see, all paper currencies have fallen in value over tenfold against gold as a hard currency over the intervening period, which is roughly since around 2002, 2003. So my clients come from all over the place, the business owners, a lot of them, professionals and so on. So the typical kind of mix of sort of what you would expect. And then separate to that, I've obviously involved in commentating, because I believe that the fourth estate in Ireland deserted the Irish people in the first quarter of 2020 and haven't come back. There's piles of stuff that's happening that is simply not being reported in mainstream media. And as a result of that, people are in a state of manufactured ignorance, a lot of Irish people, because they're consuming their information from journalism that has actually deserted them. And that's, I can prove that. It's quite stark and it's out in the open. I brought out a book there at the end of last year called Breaking the Silence on the Return of Totalitarianism. And that really is born out of 4 years, nearly 5 years now, of research, going to conferences, interviewing people on Counterpoint, which is my channel across all platforms. So it's on YouTube, it's on X, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And so I distill that down and produce an analysis which outlines all of this, just to try to get people to see the world as it is, and not as how it's been filtered and screened by a media in Ireland that is now owned by the state. I mean, RT is being bailed out to the tune of 720 million. But what a lot of people don't know is that the rest of the commercial media, like the Irish Independent Group and News Talk and so on, the Journal.ie, they're all getting money from the state. The total amount of money they're getting amounts to 7.5 million. So, I mean, they're captive to the state. So the idea that, that any of the hard questions are being addressed in mainstream media is complete nonsense. It's just tosh. And so especially when you get into the really hard stuff, like what really happened around COVID, how did we end up signing the European Migration Pact, despite the fact that we voted in 2009 on Lisbon II, that we would only join Lisbon, sign the Lisbon Treaty, provided we retain control of our borders. That should have been put to a national referendum. It wasn't. Why not? All of these hard questions are not being answered. We've been told by the previous Minister for Justice, for example, Helen McEntee, that there is no link between the recent type of immigration that we've been experiencing and crime. I mean, this is just untruthful. And even though we have a dearth of data in Ireland, we can rely on data from other countries, including Denmark especially, where we can clearly see that it's the opposite is the case. So these are very, very serious matters, especially when you look at the changing face of the country and the fall in personal feelings of personal safety and security that accompany all of this change. So what I see in an Irish government today is just a huge propaganda machine. The media, the mainstream media, are simply an arm of it. The establishment is very powerful in Ireland, far too powerful. in my opinion. There's a trampling of civil rights and free personal freedoms, and there's much more in the pipeline, and that's what the presidential election is all about. That's why they jimmied it. They don't want they want somebody in the RS that will simply sign off the ugly legislation that's coming in order to hit Agenda 2030. I'll get into all of that, which obviously, Ciara, but that's why I'm doing that. And then finally, my next book I'm hoping to get out by the end of the year, which is called The Assembly of Critical Thinking. And the whole idea is to try and get people to reawaken their critical thinking faculty so that they can explore these questions themselves using critical thinking skills, and organize critical thinking meetings to get away from the propaganda and the echo chambers and the algorithm driven content that we're all getting drowned in, and back down again to the type of conversations we used to have before we were scared to death of using the hurty words. Which is all part of what we've gone through over the last number of years. So that's what I'm at. So those three things: I'm writing, I'm broadcasting, and I'm running a financial firm.
So nothing major. You're not doing too much then at all. So just with relation to the critical thinking side of things, which I would be in complete agreement, the idea of asking questions and having conversations, hard conversations sometimes and uncomfortable conversations, but they're necessary. So with that being said, economically, socially, politically, what do you think the truth is that we're not being told?
Well, we're not being told that the Irish government is basically a Vichy government captive to powers from outside of Ireland. We're not being told that after the Irish collapse, Ireland became captive to the World Economic Forum agenda of stakeholder capitalism. We're not being told that. We're not being told the truth. That the Irish people themselves have been alienated from their own democracy as a consequence of the swarm of NGOs around Parliament. For example, the only NGO that was actually terminated over the last number of years was Benefax, whose purpose was to actually look at the flows of money that we're putting in and who's getting what and where and why. So stakeholder capitalism was designed by the World Economic Forum, which was set up in the early 19th, and the chief protagonist at the top of that until very recently was Klaus Schwab. It's now Larry Fink, the head of the most powerful corporation in the world, BlackRock. I mean, you couldn't script this kind of stuff, and they're producing the corporate agenda, which is what stakeholder capitalism is about. So the NGOs then are being financed a lot of it from the outside of Ireland, and they're lobbying the Irish government policy. And so that's why you saw the huge disconnect in 2024 when the Irish people put the run on the state, all the commentariat and the NGOs all promoting a yes vote in the constitutional referendum to try and change the definition of marriage.
Yeah, that's
all part of that. And also, you can be absolutely certain that the reason why the Irish government did not go to the people to join the European Migration Pact was for the same reason. And so they're getting their instructions from above. They've jimmied the presidential election. It's all part of the same pattern. And they're the type of questions that are not being examined.
And with that in mind, and just thinking about why people don't ask these questions, a phrase that I learned in 2020, obviously, when everything happened, was cognitive dissonance. So where is the disconnect between what people are seeing right in front of their faces, the truth of the matter, we'll call it, and their, I don't want to call it an inability to want to see it, but their willingness to shut down? Is it because there's too much information, it's too much of a bombardment, or is it because it's too easy?
Well, it's quite clear. There's recent work done in this area, so we know the actual date that this happened. And this was by Deborah Lerman of the Brownstone Institute. She just brought out a book a few weeks ago called The Deep State Goes Viral. And what it shows is that on the 28th of February 2020, the health establishment, led by Fauci and all the rest of them, was basically taken over. Like the whole COVID thing was immediately taken over in Five Eyes, which is really United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Britain. And you can add in France, Holland, and Germany into this as well. And it was taken over by by what we call the security state, which is basically the spies, military, and that explains why we were in our countries in the West. We were subject to a massive psyops, massive, and at military level, with military precision and military power behind it, based on decades of study. And that's why that would explain the speed at which people were deplatformed, delicensed, cancelled, and attacked, and why people then started to engage in what, and this is studied as well by, for example, Matthias Desmond, the professor of psychology at the University of Ghent. People really got involved in what we call mass formation. I describe that as like murmuration, starlings murmurating, pushed into a murmuration condition. And in that kind of condition, the critical thinking faculty is completely diminished. Desmond put some interesting numbers on it. He says, look, in order for this to take hold in any society, and these societies in the West were completely open to it, you have to have 4 conditions. And he also identifies the fact that the first of those 4 conditions is a direct function of the use of technology in society, the interconnectedness through mobile phones and so on. And the first condition for this kind of mass formation to take place is about 25% of the population with high levels of loneliness. And we now know that the more of this technology that is in use in countries, the more isolated people are from one another, not more connected. We're not communicating with one another. We're streaming at one another. The algorithms are pushing us into echo chambers, and we're just throwing tropes at one another from left and right. The engagement isn't there, and that creates loneliness. The next issue he identified was that it's all interconnected. Of course, a high proportion of the population that feel they're just drifting through life. They're disconnected from the zeitgeist. They're kind of aimlessly just passively experiencing life. So that leads to what we call free-floating anxiety. You're anxious, you don't know why you're anxious. You mightn't even recognize the fact that you're anxious, but you've all the signs of anxiety, but there's nothing that you're particularly focused on. It's just you're in a constant state of flight or fight. And finally, then that leads to frustration and anger, irritation, and of course, unvented anger in a lot of cases. So along comes something which identifies the reason you feel this way is the cause. I mean, back in the 1930s in Germany, it was the Jewish population of Germany. In the Soviet Union, it was the kulaks, and they become othered. In our case with COVID, it was COVID itself was deemed to be the object that is causing this, and the othering then were the people that wouldn't get vaccinated. So when that happened, I remember when when Michael D. Higgins signed the laws which allowed for the othering of other Irish citizens that were unvaccinated, and I'm vaccinated. I was stunned. I said, God, can we not see? Has nobody looked at Staunton? And we're on step 4 or 5 on the 10 steps which ends in genocide. I mean, this is the way this works. You other a population, you demonize it, and before you know it, you're imprisoning people. You're throwing them out of their professions, and then it just gets, and it can deteriorate. Now, remember, it took 10 years for Germany to go from 1933 Enabling Act to the actual mass killing of Jews. And by the way, often forgotten is the much greater volume of Soviet prisoners that were eliminated by the same machine. So this has happened before, and that explains it. And now that we're post-COVID, at least that's what people think, but of course we're not, because we can see the studies showing that there's a significant problem with mRNA vaccines, the damage that it's caused to immune systems, to cardiac health, and of course and cancers. I've interviewed people on this matter, so all the data and information sitting out there. It's been studied by Rancor and his group in Canada. They've looked at the excess death data throughout the world across about 2.5 billion populations across so many countries, including Ireland, and they calculate that the pathogen, the so-called pathogen itself, really didn't cause any excess deaths. The excess deaths are caused by 3 things. Firstly, there was a huge increase in excess deaths at the start due to the response to the pathogen, and they were mostly amongst the elderly and unwell inside in hospitals, moved out to nursing homes. We saw that in Italy. We saw it in New York. And this data then was used to create the more scare That was the first thing. Of course, you had the PCR test set at 45 cycles, which created a phantom epidemic when there wasn't any. There was obviously there was a virus, as there always is, but it wasn't a pandemic. They changed the definition of a pandemic in 2009 in the WHO. There's no minutes of that meeting. They removed high fatality and high morbidity, so it was all set up. The first early evidence of it appearing was in September 2019, and 6 weeks later, this was in Wuhan. The same month, a Bill Gates Foundation put 53 million into BioNTech, which became the partner to Pfizer. And 6 weeks later, the Gates Foundation and the World Economic Forum sponsored an event in New York called Event 201, which gamed a coronavirus pandemic, killing 60 million people and requiring the health agencies to flood the zone to prevent misinformation and disinformation. And then 6 or 7 weeks later, we actually had the beginning of the early stages of a public health emergency of international concern, a fake, being announced by the WHO. And that was mostly happening at Davos in January 2020. So I've looked at all of this, I've joined the dots, got the timelines, as you can see. And so like for me then, you now in a situation some years later where a high proportion, like at least a quarter of the Irish population, are so deep into the thing. These were the COVIDistas, the people that would tell you that you're not 2 meters back, you need to move 2 meters back, where's your mask? All of the people that kind of got into that state of high anxiety about the whole thing are deep into cognitive dissonance and will never leave it.
Yeah.
They just cannot accept anything that could challenge the belief system. And there's no point in talking to them about it. The battleground really is for the people in the middle that intuitively know something significantly is wrong here, but just haven't managed to join the dots yet because they just maybe can't yet face the type of information that I've just been giving there, and all of the other books and videos and all the stuff that's out there that people just don't want to face. And also because it's not being presented to them in the Irish media. And I mean, all the Irish media are not presenting this information. I'm not just talking about the broadsheets and RT and News Talk and all the rest of it. I can tell you that it permeates throughout local radio stations and so on, because they've all been threatened. I mean, I was talking to a radio station, actually a number of them, who told me this directly, that we can't give you an interview, Eddie, on the World Health Organization and the impending treaty. This is in 2024, because our license is being threatened. And that's what was happening. So there was a lot of, like, people knew. I mean, if you look at the doctors, for example, there's 24,000 registered by Irish Medical Council, but only about a dozen of them stood up, Ciara, and that's because they knew. I mean, it was in the ether. That's how Ireland works. It's not written anywhere. People knew. Say nothing. Keep your head down, Paul. Tall poppy syndrome. Let somebody else do the running. Don't say anything. Just don't. Stay out of it. But as a consequence of that, there's a huge amount of people in Middle Ireland that know this is rotten. They're now saying it in the election. There's something rotten going on. What is it? Well, all the information is there, but you have to be prepared to sit down, spend some time looking at it in isolation, then chatting to people, checking it out, coming to your own conclusions instead of just following a voice.
Well, yeah, and it goes back to critical thinking yet again, and it is a bit like that tall poppy syndrome, putting your head above the parapet and saying, okay, I'm going to ask a question and whatever's going to happen is going to happen, but I'm willing to do it anyway. And I suppose psychologically, maybe looking at it from that perspective, that 10 steps that you talked about, that's why there are that group of people that will never ask any questions and that do have that cognitive dissonance, because those steps are set up in a psychological way for a reason, to carry people along, to get them to that end result of them being controlled, I suppose you might say.
Yeah, well, they don't quite see it themselves. One of the interesting things that Desma tells us is that most of the SS came out of that 25% that were just aimless, high degrees of loneliness, high anxiety, a sort of free-floating anxiety and so on, and anger and unvented anger. And they were up to the bitter end. They were the actual battalion inside, or the troops inside in Berlin as the Red Army was coming and still firing away. I mean, Hitler, he was even dead at that stage, and they were still at it. and a lot of them came from non-German areas. I mean, the Lithuanians were in there, the Ukrainians were in there, battling away. These were committed Nazis, committed SS, and they just completely wrapped up in the ideology. And that's unfortunate, but I can tell you that there, at least 25% of the Irish population using the same model will never accept that what they went through and what they believed was actually a premeditated psychological operation. Now, if you look at the RANCOR numbers, they split the excess deaths as being caused by the initial response for the elderly. The second big cause was lockdown itself. We should have never gone into lockdown. And all of the science was do not lock down. And the reason for that is that lockdown causes far more damage to the health of a society than a coronavirus passing through it. That's why you don't do lockdowns. And this is well-established medical science for many decades. But suddenly we were going into lockdown despite the fact that it made no sense. And the reason for that was that the health establishment was no longer in control. From the 28th of February 2020, it was the military the military establishment that focused on, for example, the Central Intelligence Agency in America, MI6 in Britain, that level. They were running the show. This was the security state, and they were using the bioterrorism response playbook. And so, I mean, we were looking at Fauci, and we were internationally. We were looking at the same fella in Britain. And we had our own, the Irish side of it were really just a managerial class following orders. We were listening to them. We were watching, the Leon Bowers show every evening, coming out of the late at NEFID meeting, scaring the crap out of the Irish population. We all were. I mean, I was affected, but like everybody else, broken sleep. High levels of free-floating anxiety, just like everybody else, until I noticed a pattern, and the pattern was the manipulation of the media. It was quite clear to me what was going on, and then the closing down of mainstream media taking any kind of opinion pieces, and that hasn't changed, by the way. And then I knew something rotten was going on. So typically, I started to investigate it. And we are where we are today. At least I am where I am today as a consequence of that. Now, there was lots of people ahead of me carrying the load single-handedly and dealing with all the attrition that they were getting as a consequence of this military-grade psychological operation that was implemented worldwide. And it's not just, by the way, this is not just opinion now. I mean, this is established fact. We can see the actual numbers flowing through USAID after Elon Musk got in to have a look at it. We can see the actual amount of money that was used across the media globally by whom. And of course, USAID was simply a CIA cutout. In other words, it was part of the extended arm of the CIA. And just the media were being corralled. The technology platforms, they were all engaged in censorship, deep censorship. Facebook, Twitter, before Musk got in there, and so on, and TikTok. And it was just verboten to have a counter narrative, and that's what happened.
And it's crazy to think about how much power has been, I suppose, allocated to various different people. So when it comes to just Ireland specifically, and in relation to everything, say, that's happened since 2020 and where we are now, how much power do you think the politicians actually have, or how much of it is, for want of a better word, theatre? How much is being fed to be fed on?
Well, it's a good question. In my opinion, there is no power, no material power left in the Dáil or the Senate in Ireland. It's theatre. It's bread and circuses. Yes, there is legislation passing through that's coming from indigenous sources, from Irish sources, but it's all the small change stuff. The big decisions are being pushed through to the permanent establishment in Ireland. I'll come back to those in a second. And of course, the political. I mean, they regard the elected representatives of Ireland as merely the summer help. That's how it works. So senior civil servants go over to Brussels. They're second-class civil servants over there. They're told what to do, what the legislative agenda is, and they go and implement it. So when we go back to when Ireland went burst and we were all too busy looking down at our shoes in shame, Ireland was subject to a coup, a soft coup, and that was the implementation of stakeholder capitalism. where the NGO swarm and all the rest of it started to take over, and everything flows then from what happens next. So what happened next was that the United Nations selected the Irish diplomats and senior civil servants and some Kenyans to actually put together the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, which very few people know about. But this is the hidden program for government that's been running Ireland for the last 10 years. It's the basic strategic document. And one of its biggest milestones is 2030, agendas, targets that must be hit. So there's 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. And if you go to any AI engine and you ask them how many of these goals cannot be implemented without lax and open borders in Europe, the answer is 7 of the 17. That's 40%. And that's why we have open borders and lax borders in Europe. It's all by design. And we know this as well. I mean, Trump went into the United Nations just a few weeks ago and he tore them a new one. And he said, as for climate change, well, he said, we think it's a hoax, so we're out of that, as you well know. And he said, and the United Nations itself, he called them out. He said, you are responsible for flooding these illegal immigrants up through our southern borders from everywhere in the world, and you're destroying Europe. In fact, Europe is destroying itself by adopting these zero carbon nonsense, and then having open borders at the same time. You're destroying our countries. I mean, he laid it out, and he couldn't have laid it out in more simple terms. Whether you like him or not, this is the result of close examination by the United States establishment itself. And you can quickly see the change over there, like all the DEI stuff and all of the woke kind of language is all now taking the back burner. And and the economy is stabilized now. He's got a huge problem with his. I won't get into too much into this at the moment, but it is interesting to watch what's going on, because that's the big pushback. But it's now happening in Europe as well. We're beginning to see a shift across Europe. The Overton window, which is the gap between the two extremes, left and right, is shifting. And we see it in Holland, we see it in Germany with the AfD, you see it in Italy, obviously. Melani's after getting in there, and we're going to see it shortly in France. I mean, that's and Finland is already there, so is Sweden. So people have had enough of it. They've had enough, and that's why I think there's going to be a big spoil the vote campaign on Friday in the presidential election. People mightn't have the depth of analysis that I've gone into here. I accept that, and I wouldn't expect them to. I've always been kind of at the tip of the spear anyway at things, so that's where my mind sort of the way my mind operates is to be there. But most people are just busy getting on with their lives, bringing up their families and so on. I can tell they know this is rotten, but they just haven't got the dots joined for them yet. And in a lot of cases, they may not even need the dots to be joined. They just say, I've had enough of this, whatever this is. And I think that's happening at the moment, and it's going to be very significant. I think Ireland is on the cusp of very significant change over the next few years, because people have had enough of this nonsense.
Well, it definitely feels like that. And I'd love to talk about the Spoil the Vote campaign at the minute. So I know that a few of your team members for that campaign were meeting at the weekend. And I'd love to know, how did it come about? And can you explain what spoiling the vote means?
Well, spoil the vote is a legitimate action that let's just look at what it's not, right? If you're completely passive about what's going on, you said, I couldn't be bothered going down voting. That's the worst thing that you can do, because now you're just taking yourself out of the game. And we just get a low turnout, and some people are elected. It's going to be Connolly, obviously, on the basis of the polls and so on. So the other thing that you can do, which is quite legitimate, by the way, and this was reinforced in the European elections last year by the justice in charge of the election commission, basically saying spoil the vote is a legitimate democratic action. And what you're doing is you're sending a message through to government. We think this is nonsense. This is not acceptable. And what has happened, of course, is that, and I know this because I've investigated it. I recently interviewed, for example, Garrett Sheridan on this. The block went in. Fianna Fáil blocked it, and so did Fine Gael, quite deliberately through the councils. People don't know this, but 21 of the councils decided not to nominate anybody. 21. We're told, go out and exercise your right to a democracy. A lot of people died to get you here, blah blah blah. But when it actually comes to doing something themselves, they deliberately spoil their whole process by not nominating anybody. I mean, that's complete evasion of democratic responsibility. None of the councils in the country as well could adjust their standing orders to allow for a secret ballot to take place, which means that they could have defeated the whip. But they didn't want to defeat the whips from the uniparty, from the political parties. So, and there is no question about whether that was constitutional or not. We'll see how that goes. I don't expect it to go very far in time to do anything about Friday. But the thing is that we've been manipulated. The Irish, again, have been caught and manipulated by the government, just like they did when they voluntarily joined the EU Migration Pact. I mean, it's so obvious what's going on. They just didn't want to have any kind of independent-minded barrister or anybody of that level inside in the Áras questioning the actual pipeline of legislation that their masters are telling them to push through, which will include an update to compulsory purchase orders, which will increase the powers of the government and the speed at which it can alienate you from your property. It's also going to include legislation in order to bring in central bank digital currency, which is coming in fast. That will be arriving on European shores within the next number of weeks. And then, of course, the biometric digital ID, which is the digital gulag that these people behind all of this crave so much, which gives them complete control. So if you link biometric digital ID, just explain that if you have an asset of any kind, or you have the right to a service, a public service of any kind, and suddenly you can't get at it without going through a biometric digital ID, in other words, fingerprints, your eyes, your iris, and all the rest of it, being recorded in a centralized computer system, along with your vaccine data, your travel. You will eventually have your carbon limits thrown in there as well, and the central bank digital currency will dictate what you can or can't spend your money on, as well as where you can and can't travel to, and what you can or can't put into your shopping basket. That's the plan. I mean, it sounds Orwellian. It is Orwellian, but that's the plan. I mean, this kind of global government control by the plutocracy. I mean, this has been a long-held ambition. I could talk for the next hour about when it all started and who the players were and all the organizations. But what I can tell you is that all of the major supranational organizations are owned and controlled by the people that are promulgating this agenda. That means United Nations, the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, the two main spy agencies in the Council for Foreign Relations in Washington, and the equivalent in Britain, which is Chatham House. They're in there. The Bank for International Settlements are in there. They're the apex a bank in the world. So you have two basic branches really that they work through. One is the executive branch, which is all of the agencies of government, including supranational organizations and the NGOs, and the corporations, big corporation power as well. They operate through that. And faced with that kind of power, the ordinary citizens, unless they collectively figure out what's going on and stand up and say no, have no hope. And that's what they're hoping for. And now technology and computer processing power, with quantum computers especially coming in, gives them, and of course the low-level orbiting satellite systems that are being built, that gives them enormous capacity to control the global population. And once they have control, then you have then you can continue to ensure that your family dynasties will continue on into the centuries ahead. And of course, it also means that if you have huge corporations and massive ownership of the key components of human society, you can then do monopoly deals in many countries throughout the world where you basically own the marketplace. I mean, that's the plan. Now, will it succeed? I don't think it will succeed, but it won't succeed on the basis that more and more people are waking up to it, and that's why you're seeing a shift in the European election, the polls, and as the sort of the more centre right and right wing parties emerge, challenging all of this, and I also believe that Trump is doing enormous damage to it, positively to it. But in Ireland, we are the North Korea of Europe when it comes to any of this kind of information. You can't talk about it. Nobody will take a column on it. If you say anything along those lines, you're deemed to be a nutcase, etc. You're a racist, or you're far right, or whatever trope is used. No, all that is wearing thin as things move on. But that's where we are.
But it does come back to what you said in the beginning, to be able to have those honest conversations where you're not afraid to just ask a question and have an opinion and be cancelled for it. But so I have two questions for you in relation to the idea that people say taking their power back. Where would you see that happening? Would you see it as something like spoil the vote, or would you see it in a different way where people are actually taking their sovereignty back, I suppose you would call it?
Well, into the future, yes. I mean, the Irish are slow to rose. But once you rose them, they're rosed. I think the spoil the vote would be. I mean, if you go back to 2024, I think the response to the constitutional referendum was very emphatic. When then you go to the general election, I think that I think Sinn Féin are no different from Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil. They're a blend of each other. Sinn Féin, by the way, were going to tell us that they were going to force us back into the constitutional referendum with new words if we said no. They quickly dropped that. And they did nothing about this crazy situation of massive amounts of illegal immigration coming into the country and IPAS centres and everything else that's going on there, because nobody wants to use the hurty words. This isn't a racist thing. This is a security issue we've got. It's family security, especially your wives, your daughters. It's community security. We know this. We can see it from the data and from just looking around, and it's a national security issue. So we need to deal with it as a security issue. The problem is that we're waiting for somebody else to come along with the solution, which is Europe, because that's why we joined the European Migration Pact. And the one country in Europe that have done a good job, and this is Denmark. That's the model. But so I mean, all of this is very doable. So how will it change? Well, I think that change will be forced upon the Irish establishment. It's so deeply ingrained here. We'll be the last. It will be forced upon us. They'll see the change going on in Europe. They see the change going on in America. America now are effectively out of the whole zero carbon nonsense. That's the end of zero carbon. I mean, if you're not getting the biggest economy in the world in fact the biggest economy in the world is telling you we think the whole thing is nonsense. By the way, there's an awful lot of scientific evidence to support that. That's why they're taking that position. Then the whole thing, this whole drama, or theatre that we've been through for the last 10 or 15 years will fall away. And we'll actually see, the Wizard of Oz, a small little fat fella behind the curtain, and say, geez, imagine we were believing all this crap,
Well, it's trend,
and we did.
isn't it?
We fell for it. Yeah, we did. But it's all of it is an illusion. And but we're deep in the illusion here. And what's causing that is the captivity and the desertion of the Irish people by its fourth estate.
Yeah, it feels like there's a lot of trending things going on. Things are trending. And so when they trend, people follow the trend for a while and until, like you said there, it's forced upon you to change and, come back to the truth of the matter. But with those trends happening, why do you think England was chosen as the first for this digital ID?
Yeah, I don't think Britain ever really recovered from Blair.
Okay.
I think that the 15 years of Tory government was all over the shop, and they lost a complete focus on national strategy. I think that Keir Starmer is a typical managerial class globalist, much like we have here running our government. At low level in terms of international status, they would be low level managerial class implementers. They don't even look at what's going on strategically. They just follow orders. And that's what and Britain. I mean, it is extraordinary, but we're beginning to see. I mean, there was like it's so obvious. Like, I mean, the BBC and Sky reported 110,000 British people came out onto the streets of London recently in that rally. I mean, like, there was at least 1 million people, or close to it, if not more. I mean, it was jammed. London was jammed.
Yeah,
absolutely jammed. I mean, the British people are looking at this saying. They're saying this exact same thing I'm saying. We've had enough of this. This is utter garbage. And they've had enough of it. And so that's why all the flags are going up as well over there. So you're like the British people, very like the Irish people, like we have a lot in common in that sense. The British people are slow to rose as well. But my God, when they rose, and we saw that during the Thatcher era over the poll tax. I mean, I just think that it's bananas. It's Keir Starmer. I think it's panic. I think it's a last lunge. They're just trying to get it done as fast as they can, and now they're making mistakes. And we see that. I mean, Larry Fink going in as the CEO, taking over from Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. That's a desperation move, because it's so obvious. It's so obvious what's going on now, you know. And once people hear these kind of conversations for the first time, you know, they'll, you know, I often say that, you know, when it's a bit like a frosty morning in the countryside, and you hear the church bell. You can hear it miles across a frosty morning early.
Yeah.
That's truth. You know, truth has an essence to it. It
Yeah.
it has a property to it. That when you hear it, you know it. You know it. You intuitively know it. You don't know why you know it's the truth. It just feels that way. That's part of human consciousness, and that's why I think that this is happening. People are beginning to hear they're getting that church bell moment in their own minds, and they're saying something, you know, this is nonsense. We're going to have to do something about this. We're going to have to put a stop to it. So I think the political systems across Europe, including in Britain, will dramatically change over the next 5 or 10 years, because people have had enough. I actually think that that the old political establishment are now on the extreme, and the people are actually in the middle. And that's an observation that's been made across political analysis, by the way, by you know, for at least the last 12 months or so. So I think that's true. And but it just hasn't registered here yet, because in the general election there wasn't really any alternative to the Uniparty. I mean, Sinn Féin were just the Uniparty with just some policy changes. So there was no real choice. And the development of these new nascent political wannabes didn't happen, and because it's very difficult. People, I mean, I have some experience of this. I can tell you that setting up a new political party in Ireland, the whole system that we've got is set up to ensure that the incumbents are protected from any new arrivals.
Yeah.
And because of the way the financial situation, the way the finances are so tightly controlled, it makes it almost impossible to set up a new political party, because you have to rely on volunteerism. And volunteerism will get you a lot of energy for at least a month or two, and then it just falls away. And the only people that will continue on then are the zealots. And the problem with zealots is that they destroy a political party very quickly.
I remember speaking to somebody, it was a long, long time ago, and they had decided to go into politics, and they went in for, for a party, and they had this idealized view of what they would love to have achieved when they went in. And they said they were in there for 12 weeks and they left because they realized it was a closed shop, basically. And it's hard when you hear that, because you've got people who are genuinely good, who would love to make change. And it's difficult, probably too difficult for most people to want to step up and actually create that change, because, like you're saying, the system is already rigged.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, I mean, people have to understand the scale of it. I mean, if you take COVID as the example, the political the permanent the civil service, the permanent establishment, and the NGOs are running the show. The things that come through Leinster House, different political parties, and all of the political correspondent nonsense around them, that's just bread and circuses. That's theatre. The actual power is with the permanent government and the NGOs taking their instructions through the centre from the EU, who themselves are linked into bigger agendas. And then the supranational organisations like the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, and the WHO, and the all of them. That's where real power is, and the people above that, at the very apex of all of that, that's real power. I mean, we are really like the craggy island of the world, if you know what I mean. Like we don't count, and you can see that in the peace conference that Trump organised with all of the nations over in the Middle East. The Irish weren't there. I mean, despite all of the energy that goes into, putting our toe in the waters here about events over there. It just doesn't register. We're not relevant. We have a role, but we don't have a role like that. So when you look at COVID, what you see is a failure of the political establishment, the permanent establishment, the health establishment, the scientific establishment, to stand up for the people, for the Irish people themselves. And people can sometimes get confused between the people and the state. The people set up the state, and the preamble to the Constitution is the people speaking to the state, which is just setting up about how it wants the place to run. As the Irish people predate the state by centuries, many centuries, and that's the frame of mind we have to have. So I often say, that when the when the government are afraid of the people, that's democracy, real democracy in operation. When the people are afraid of the government, that's tyranny, and we're closer to the latter than we are to the former.
Yeah, for sure. Leave us then with this. How do we become more relevant in terms of family, community, and country as a people?
Well, I mean, I'm trying to do my own little bit with the critical thinking initiative, because critical thinking isn't a question of going into a debate. It's a question of getting a group of people together and actually having a critical thinking session where you collaboration, you're trying to solve a question that is in front of you. And you're not letting anybody dominate. So you have to leave your ego at the door. You have to learn all of these, relearn these processes. They've been around for 3,000 years ago. Well, 2,500 years ago. It goes way back to the time of Socrates and then forward through all the great philosophers and thinkers right up to date. I'll cover all that in the book. But so I think that the Irish are very good at critical thinking, but it's been greatly diminished because of all the streaming and propaganda that we've gone through, especially over the last 5 years. But the Irish have always had a capacity and a love of real information, real intelligence, high quality engagement with information as opposed to nonsense. We much prefer that. And also we listen we're a race. We like to listen and watch and engage, but the engagement has to be authentic, and it's not authentic at the moment. It's streaming. You're just being streamed at, and then there's divided camps with the algorithms trying to separate the different tribes, and then it's all shouting. I think we've had enough of it, and I think that there's an opportunity for us here to kind of reemerge as a race of critical thinking people. We get together in groups. We have our topics. We begin to talk about them in the coffee shop, in the pubs, on the streets, in the dressing room after the games, and we begin to talk openly to one another again and see each other as just fellow travelers trying to figure out what's really going on and be unafraid to say what we think without feeling we're going to offend some named minority using hurty words, because what that's doing is it's trapping us within our own heads, and that's actually very dangerous for us for mental health, which is the biggest impact from lockdown. Was a huge impact on mental health.
You can see it. Eddie, it's been a pleasure. Will you let me know where I can tell people to get your books?
Oh yeah, well the existing book is out. It's free online. You'll get it on. There's a link that you'll find on my profiles in Twitter and on TikTok and so on. There's a link there that you can get. It's also on my central hub is just eddiehobbs.com. So the link is in there as well. You can download that book free on your phone, all for nothing. Or you can go, if you want to get a hard copy, you can get it from Amazon. So that's there at the moment. There's piles of stuff then on Counterpoint, which you'll find on all social channels. It goes from YouTube across to Facebook and X and so on. And that's going well. And the next book won't be out until the end of the year, Ciara. So when that comes out, I'll obviously let people know it's there, and I'll probably do the same thing again, and allow people to get the book for nothing, which you just download it onto your phone. So it's something that you can read on your phone, which doesn't suit a lot of everybody. But I hope to do an audio version as well, and then a print version, obviously, which will be available on Amazon and other areas.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that. And if you want to find Eddie on YouTube, you can catch him at Real Eddie Hobbs, and his channel is Counterpoint. Eddie, it's been a pleasure chatting to you, and I do hope that we get to potentially do something as a roundtable down the line.
Can I just make one?
Of course, you can.
Could I just put this out to people? If you're hearing this, if there's an action you can do this week. If you feel like me, you're going to spoil your vote. That's good that you've made that decision. Obviously, we have to respect other people's decisions, but there'll be lots of people within your group that are just undecided. Whether I'm going to vote or not. Just make a phone call. Just bring 2 or 3 of them. Just try and persuade them to go down to the booth. Rather than staying at home and actually spoil their vote. Cast the spoil the vote, and let's send a message to this government that we've had enough.
Yep. And just so that everybody is aware, because I didn't actually say this at the beginning, this month, October 2025, is our presidential election, which is why we're actually talking about this Spoil the Vote campaign. And we only have 2 candidates in the running, and it has been a bit of a farce up to this point. So this is why the Spoil Your Vote campaign has been created. So Eddie, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. I'm conscious of where you are and that you need to get back at it. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to chatting to you in the future.
Okay, thanks, Ciara.
Take care, Eddie.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Thanks everybody for tuning in to All In Live with Eddie Hobbs. It's been a pleasure. And if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we can get those questions to Eddie. Thanks so much. Take care, everyone.